If you would open up to Mark chapter 6. We're going to start there tonight. Mark chapter 6. As we continue this series on the I Am series of Jesus, talking about what He is, think in terms of the bread of life, tonight, the Good Shepherd. Think about Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the light. These kind of statements that Jesus makes about Himself. And to know that Jesus never lied. So when you start looking at what He calls Himself, you know for certain that that's the way it is. The question is, do we trust it? Do we trust Him? I want you to think in terms of shepherd just for a moment. Think in terms of a physical shepherd. What all do they take care of with their flock? Safety, food, water, shelter, all their needs. He fills everything that they need. You think in terms of even looking at them bruised, sick, broken. He's the one who takes care of these things. Think in terms of food, drink. You go down through the list over and over again. Just to think about whenever the sheep are shorn, He even takes care of them then, in the midst of those things. Think about, when's the normal time for a shepherd to shear his sheep? Is it in winter? What time of the year does he choose? In the spring when it's starting to get warm. Sheep don't need that big old coat for the summer. He knows those things. And that's how He looks at it. He sees what's best for the sheep. Now I want you to notice here in Mark chapter 6, I want you to start down in verse 33. The people saw them going, and if you kind of want context for the previous 3 verses, the apostles have just come back after being sent out to preach, and they could cast out demons. Jesus gave them that authority. They come back, and they're really excited about what happened, and they're tired. And so Jesus says, let's go away to a secluded place where there's not a whole lot of the people. Well, as they go, this big old crowd sees where they're going, and they get there at the same time. So then you get here to verse 33. The people saw them going, and many recognized them and ran there together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of them. Verse 34. When Jesus went ashore, He saw a large crowd, and He felt compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And He began to teach them many things. What did Jesus see about this crowd? What do they look like? Sheep without a shepherd. Now, I want you to jump into the physical side for a second. You drive all kinds of highways now, and you see sheep out, and they're in a field, fenced in, you know they're taken care of. What does sheep look like? Just think in terms of a physical side. What does sheep look like when they don't have a shepherd? What would you imagine? Scattered, chaos, vulnerable. That's a good word. Well fed? No. Think about their coats all matted and filthy, not taken care of, just kind of left to whatever happens. Maybe some might even be missing parts because of predators that have come by. Here's Jesus. He sees this big old crowd. And He looks at them, and notice, He looks at them with compassion. And what strikes the compassion side of Him? What does He see about these people? They look lost. They need help. Now, are you thankful that that's the way Jesus is? That whenever He sees sheep who are distressed, who have been left to themselves, that He has compassion to want to step in? Because is that not what He did for us? Isn't that the way you would describe our lives before coming to Jesus, the Good Shepherd? Now, He continues on here. I want you to notice the very first thing that He addresses When he sees that they don't have a shepherd, that they're like sheep without a shepherd, what's the first thing that he does? He teaches them. Now, we're not talking about physical sheep now. What are we looking at here? This is people. This is a spiritual side. The very first thing that's going to be addressed by him, the good shepherd, is, I'm going to feed them. But it's not physical food. It's spiritual food. He teaches them, and they stay. And because of that, then notice what comes next, verse 35. It says, when it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, this place is desolate, and it's already quite late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. Here's Jesus. He says, all right, go. Just tell them to go buy themselves something to eat. Just send them away. Then, of course, here's Jesus. But he answered them. Now, here's Jesus' response. Remember, what's he already recognizing about these people? They're lost. They're like a sheep without a shepherd. He says, here's the disciples, the 12. They say, well, just send them away. Don't bother. Let them take care of themselves. That's what got them in this situation. Right? Verse 37, he answered them, you give them something to eat. They said to them, how shall we? And spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat. And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go look. And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. He commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass. Now, why do you think it points out green grass? What do shepherds look for?
A good place.
Good place, right? Interesting. He brought up about shepherding. Well, I'm going to bring you to the best place. Sit down on the green grass. It's not like they're going to literally eat the grass. But you just notice, are they being provided for? Let's just have a seat. We're already in a good place. It's right here. Then, it says they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before them. And he divided up the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. Now, he's taken care of them so well that they are not only taken care of on the spiritual side of being fed, now they're even taken care of on the physical side of being taken care of. How's that for a good shepherd? He sees after both sides of us. Now, the physical shepherd, he just takes care of the sheep. There's not a spiritual side to physical sheep. But spiritual sheep, there sure is. And is he taking care of everything? He is. Notice how it continues, verse 43. They picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces and also of the fish. There were 5,000 men who ate the loaves. 5,000. How's that for a flock? 5,000. Just think about how much ground it would take to have 5,000 sheep, or even 5,000 people, men. I want you to see the way that Jesus protects them. We looked at this a little bit last week, but I just want one verse. Look over at John chapter 6. Yes?
So the disciples, they were looking at the physical side of these people. They're in the middle where they're hungry. They thought they were doing good. Like, we need to send them out. They need to go.
Right. Turns into something way bigger, way bigger. John chapter 6, look at verse 15. You see Jesus take care of feeding them spiritually, feeding them physically. Now look at in terms of protecting, because isn't this what a good shepherd does? Doesn't he protect his sheep? But this one takes a little different turn. John chapter 6, verse 15. Same setting. We read this last week, earlier on, about feeding the 5,000. He says, so Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. He looks out and he sees this big old crowd, and what do they want to do? They want to make Jesus king. But I want you to see Jesus the protector. Look over at Mark chapter 6. Look back over there. Look at verse 45. Mark chapter 6, verse 45. Therefore Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side to Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowd away. Notice the terminology. What did Jesus do? It says he made his disciples get into the boat to get away from the thinking of the crowd, right? Think about Jesus ever gotten you away from the thinking of other people. There have been times in your life where you were right there in the midst of the crowd thinking something foolish, and then he had a way of drawing you out from that crowd and that thinking to realize how foolish it was. Well, here you see Jesus protecting his 12. He says, if you stay here with these 5,000 men who want to make me king, you'll start thinking just like them. Because it wasn't a spiritual king they wanted. It was what kind of king? Earthly, physical. You see Jesus protecting his apostles? Isn't that what a good shepherd does? Don't they protect? You learn that from Jesus. Here he is. How often do you see Jesus protect the weak? He does it over and over again, doesn't he? Isn't that what a good shepherd does? Does a good shepherd just stand up for the strong? Or do they look for the weak to help them? Now, go over to John chapter 10. John chapter 10. Look at the very first verse. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. Now, who do you know the door is? Jesus. So what if people start to come in by some other means? What does he call them?
A robber.
Thief and a robber. So if you don't see Jesus as being the way in, if you don't see him as being the door, then you're among thieves and robbers. Here he is, notice verse 2. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hears his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. How does the shepherd draw the sheep?
By the door.
He calls them by name. And notice the relationship. I don't know. You drive down the highway and you see these big old herds of cattle or flocks of sheep and goats. And you just kind of imagine to yourself, well, they don't have names. They're just all a bunch of sheep. What about a good shepherd? He knows them by name. It's always kind of interesting to me to hear how farmers name their cattle, or how shepherds name their sheep. There's certain qualities that they look at them. Sometimes they name them after people they know. But you start to take thought of how close-knit this relationship is. He calls them by name, and they respond just because it's his voice. They know if they follow him, they'll be taken care of. Let me give you a little. This is something that I read out of it was actually a shepherd that was over in Palestine. You ever wondered, what do you do whenever the shepherd is actually going to die? And you know that the sheep need to learn a new voice. And this is just the shepherds getting older. They're not going to be able to go out and take care of the sheep anymore. You ever wondered, how do they train the flock to follow a new voice? All right. All of a sudden, you get to where they're in a place, maybe the winter, where they're a little bit more gathered together. And you know what you do? The new shepherd goes in and makes his call, and there's two options. The sheep either starve to death, or they do what? they follow the new shepherd. Now, tie this back to Jesus. When he comes, he's not only the good shepherd, he's the new shepherd. Who have they been listening to? Who do they hold up in high esteem from the Old Testament? Moses, David, the prophets. They're not being sustained spiritually through those things. Jesus comes and teaches them something brand new. And I want you to think about the statements like in Matthew 6. He says, seek first my kingdom and my righteousness. He says, I'll add all these things to you. All these physical things that he had been talking about, like food and clothing. Jesus is the shelter, by the way. He's putting out his voice. If they'll respond, what are they going to find? The good shepherd, food and shelter, will they be taken care of? Completely and totally. So what's the introspective question for us? How do we respond to Jesus' voice? Not the audible tone. How do we respond whenever we hear his words? Do we go, you know what, that's different than what somebody else calls? So, here they are in verse 3. He says, to him the doorkeeper opens and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Notice, they're being led out from this corral. We're going to go out. It's not about all just staying in one spot. They're going to go out. Verse 4. When he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. Once again, why do they follow? They know his voice. Typically, when we think in terms of the good shepherd, we just look at Jesus. But who we really need to look at is Jesus and us. Are we those who have an attention, are very attentive to the voice of Jesus? Whenever he tells us what to do, we go, you know what, this is the way to life. That's the only direction he's going to lead us. I mean, the good shepherds take their sheep out to be slaughtered. They take them into places that are dangerous beyond their control. Certainly not. Now, he says once again, they know his voice. Verse 5, a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Here are the disciples of Jesus, the apostles. Whenever it gets to be after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, and they're preaching and teaching Jesus, and they get called before the Sanhedrin, before the Pharisees and the Sadducees in this council, and they tell them, you stop preaching and teaching about Jesus. You remember their response? You be the judge. Should we listen to God or you? Now, what did they want to say? You listen to us. See, they're not going to follow their instruction. The apostles are not going to go, oh, this is what you want. Okay, well, fine, we'll go with you. They don't know a stranger's voice. They're not going to follow in that. And they let them know they're not going to follow. And so they let them go, and sure enough, what do they go do? They preach and teach about Jesus. Notice how he continues, verse 6. This figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were which he had been saying to them. Did they get it? Didn't make any sense to them. They're like, what do you mean about being sheep? I don't baa like a sheep. Don't be degrading to me. But they didn't even understand that much. They didn't see the figure of speech. They're just like, oh, we're just talking about shepherds and sheep. They didn't go, oh, we're talking about us. Verse 7. So Jesus said to them again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. He says, all right, let me get this down there to where you can understand it. He says, I'm the door. He says, if you're going to gain, it's going to come through me. Now, I want you to think about this. He talks about earlier about the sheep gate and talk about the idea of them being in this corral. What happens if they never get outside the corral? They don't eat. And what happens in there? If you don't eat, what happens? You starve to death. Now, don't think of these things as big things like maybe what you see today at farms. But the idea, it's not like these places were manned. I mean, somebody might bring them into this place and it might have a little rock wall so high. But it's only manned when the shepherd's there. And if he pulls his sheep out, whoever doesn't follow him stays there and what? And dies. Not listening to the voice of the shepherd is basically life and death. He says in verse 7, he says, I say to you, I'm the door of the sheep. If you're going to find anything outside of death, it's going to be because of me. Verse 8, all who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. Did you ever hear a teacher, a spiritual teacher, say things and you just go, that doesn't make any sense? You ever had that experience? They're talking and you're going, I don't understand what they're talking about from these verses. It doesn't make any sense to me. And you realize, okay, the problem's not with the verses, the problem's with the teacher. Now, here's the point. Sometimes you see people who are in it for themselves. They're thieves and robbers. And you go, sometimes you figure out who they are. Now, he says, but the sheep did not hear them. Now, hold your place here in John 10. We're going to come back. I'm going to give you an illustration of this in the New Testament church. Look over the book of Revelation. Remember, the good shepherd is one that protects. Look at Revelation chapter 2. He's writing to the church at Thyatira. Revelation chapter 2, look down at verse 19. He says, I know your deeds, and your love and faith and service and perseverance, and that your deeds of late are greater than at first. He says, I know you. I know for some of you, you're doing better now than you were before. Verse 20. But I have this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and she teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. He says, here's my problem with you. And he's talking to the church. He says, you follow this woman named Jezebel. You know what? And she leads my sheep astray. And if you notice the way he talks about it, those that get led astray, whose voice have they tuned out? Jesus' voice. It says, Jezebel's leading them away to acts of immorality, not being holy with your bodies, eating things sacrificed to idols, going back to old ways. We're supposed to be new in Jesus, right? Going back to old things. That's not the voice of Jesus. Verse 21. See the compassion side of Jesus. He says, I gave her time to repent, and she does not want to repent of her immorality. What did Jesus offer? I called again. How did she respond? She didn't. I gave her time to repent. I gave her an opportunity. She didn't want it. I tell you, those are the more sad times. When someone doesn't care for the voice of Jesus and you take it to them again, and they have no concern for the voice of Jesus. Here's Jezebel. She's the same way. Notice, you see the patience of the Good Shepherd? Verse 22. He says, Behold, I will throw her on a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of her deeds. Why is Jesus doing this? Is he protecting? He is. You know that Jesus still protects now? To be able to cut out among the church those who are not listening to his voice? And all of a sudden, things can get very difficult very fast. Because he's the one who stands in control of these things. If you take quick note, he says, I'll throw her on a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation. What about those who listen to her voice over the voice of Jesus? Same thing. You don't want to follow Jesus? He says, I'm going to protect my flock. He says, unless they repent of her deeds, what opportunity are they given? Same thing. He wants to offer them life, but they have to be willing to listen for his voice. Verse 23. He says, and I will kill her children with pestilence, and all the churches will know that I am he who searches the minds and hearts, and I will give to each one of you according to your deeds. How far is he willing to go? He says, I will kill her children with pestilence. There's sickness, disease. Can disease hit flocks of sheep? Certainly. And here's an illustration that you may know far too well. Usually when people are sick, whenever one person is sick and they all hang together in the same place, what happens to all the people? They all get sick. Well, here's the situation. He says, here they are all together. He says, and all the churches will know that I am he who searches the minds and hearts. What's the point? What do you know about the Good Shepherd? How deeply does he know us? He knows the way you think, and he knows your motives. He knows your heart and your mind. And he's looking at us that way. He says, and I will give to each one of you according to your deeds. Verse 24. But I say to you, the rest who are in Thyatira, who do not hold this teaching, who have not known the deep things of Satan, as they call them, I place no other burden on you. Nevertheless, what you have, hold fast until I come. Can he tell the difference, even among one congregation, those who are attentive to his voice and those who have tuned out his voice? Can he bring about to make sure that those who hear his voice are taken care of? Does he protect his sheep? Certainly. Do we realize, do we know that it's God, it's Jesus, who knows the hearts and the minds? Come back over to John chapter 10. So whenever you see verse 8, all who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. He says, because they wouldn't go after Jezebel. They wouldn't go after people like Jezebel. Then he continues. Verse 9. He says, I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. He says, you listen to me, what will you find? Pasture? What else? Life. You'll be saved, right? You ever been saved from something you didn't even know was a threat? Yeah. That's when you know you're really well taken care of. But this doesn't mean that whenever we have certain accidents or things that happen, don't go, oh, I'm not listening to Jesus' voice. The true indicator is, even in the midst of difficulties, who do we listen to? Jesus. Realize he's the door to get through all this stuff. He's the way to life. Don't listen any other place or anyone else other than him. Verse 10. The thief comes in only to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly. He says, I'm not here to be your good shepherd so that you just barely make it. I'm here so that you have life and you have it in such abundance that other people might even go, how does that happen? How do you have such joy in the midst of difficulties? I listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd and I follow. Then, if you notice the words that he used, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Destroy is about the anxiety of the minds. It's the mental side of this picture. He says, have you ever noticed that whenever you let go of the hand of Jesus, what do you instantly find? Think everything's going to fall in? Because I'm not listening to him. He offers protection. He offers to be taken care of. Notice how it continues on here. Verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He says, I am the good shepherd. Because this is what I do. And if you want to know who the good shepherd is, how can you tell? Lays down his life for the sheep. Think back Old Testament. David grows up taking care of sheep. If you hear him talk whenever he's kind of talking to Saul about being able to go out and fight against Goliath, what does he tell Saul? He says, I've killed a lion and a bear. Now, if you saw a lion and a bear, what is your first instinct? Run, get the gun, something, right? That's us. For David, he doesn't have a gun. He got a slingshot. And apparently, he could use it okay. He looks at the bear. He looks at the lion. And instead of running away, he stands between the lion, the bear, and the sheep. Now, they're his father's flock. It's Jesse's flock of sheep. But he stands his ground. Why? He knows God's with him. Does he see a value in these sheep? What was that, Richard? They're his father's sheep. And he's going to stand in that place. And if someone is going to die, it is going to be the Good Shepherd. I can't imagine that. That's kind of not what I've been through in my life, to give my life in the place of an animal. I don't know that I justify that very easily on a physical level. But do you see the spiritual point he's making? Do you see what he's saying about you and me? Here Jesus is standing against sin and wickedness and evil. He says, and I'm going to let it take me down so that you will be spared. He says, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Think about what that means for us. He's already said, I know my sheep by name. I call with my voice and they respond because I feed them. They know I take care of them. When they're sick, I help them. When they're broken, I help bind them up. He says, whenever they're shorn in the spring because they'll be fine. You see the point here. He says, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Verse 12, he who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. What's the difference? They don't care. They're just a hired hand. They go, you know what, I'm only making $20 for doing this. It's not worth me giving my life for it. Yeah. They don't care that much about the sheep. Now, he continues here, verse 13. He flees because he is a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. So what is the big difference between a hired hand and the good shepherd? The good shepherd's concerned about the sheep. The hired hand, he's concerned about himself, he's concerned about his pay, and his life's not worth taking on any scratches for these sheep. See a big difference? Now, he continues. He says, he's not the owner. He says, the hired hand's not concerned about the sheep. Verse 14, I am the good shepherd. He says, and I know my own, and my own know me. Now, let's look at ourselves for a second. He says, I know my own, and my own know me. Do you know who your shepherd is in this life? Have you figured it out? Have you figured it out who feeds you, both physically and spiritually? Have you figured it out who protects you in your day-to-day life? Think about the statement that Paul makes. He says, we're not going to be tempted beyond what we can bear. Ever thought about who keeps that promise? Is it not the Good Shepherd? Because he's the one who lays his life down. We must mean something to him. He must really care about us. He chose us over himself. The hired man chooses himself over the sheep. If you notice it here in verse 14, I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. Do we know Jesus? Not know about Jesus. Do we know Jesus when it's his voice that's calling? When in the midst of hostile situations, you hear the good shepherd say, forgive. You can't be bitter. You can't be enraged. You can't go after anger. Are we ready to listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd? Because he leads us to life. He leads us to where we'll be fed and taken care of, protected, cared for, known by name. He continues here, verse 15, even as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. How well does he know us? He says, I know you as well as my Father knows me. I know your thinking. I know why you do things. I know what needs to be refined. I know what needs to be changed. I know what needs to be trained. And I care for you enough to not let you go off in any other direction as long as you will listen to my voice. Then he continues. He says, verse 16, I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. Who's he talking about? The Gentiles. He says, you Jews, he says, guess what? I got another flock, and we're all going to be under one shepherd. Talking about Jew and Gentile both. No partiality. Verse 17, for this reason the Father loves me. Now, that word for loves is agape. He says, this is the reason my Father agapes me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it again. He says, that's why my Father loves me, because I give my life for you. He loves me because I'm the good shepherd. Now think about that. He says, and that's why I'll always be the good shepherd, because I want my Father to always love me. Then, verse 18, no one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. Who is it up to? Here's Jesus. He says, I get to decide. What is he already telling you he has decided? I'm going to lay my life down, and I am the good shepherd. We realize how well we're taken care of if we listen to the voice of Jesus. I hope we can see it. But do we know, and maybe this is the question to end for the night, do we really recognize that Jesus is our shepherd? Do we recognize that our shepherds that we have here, who are they listening to? The voice of the chief shepherd. There's 1 Peter chapter 5. And you know what the response is? Good shepherd lays down their life for the sheep. And you stop and you think about that. Do you see the magnificence of Jesus? How much he cares and loves us? I think it's just awesome. All right. Have a good week.